Prime Minister, who will be here in only just a couple of weeks.
We are looking forward to that.
So as is he and the whole team. And there's lots of activity planning ahead of the G20. So it's very exciting.
Between the Chinese president and also your Prime Minister, they met the second day of Prime Minister Trudeau came into the office at the last G20 summit.
Yes, it was just literally a few days after the swearing-in ceremony, and but it was very exciting. And they did talk about his father and Bethune, and as well as a number of substantive issues that I think will continue. You know, began the various conversations that have been happening with ministers since then, and that have continued between them on a go-forward basis.
What can be some expectation from your side for the upcoming G20?
Obviously, you know, the government and the Prime Minister and Cabinet are looking to deepen ties with China. And so, you know, we're looking to continue that dialogue.
Justin Trudeau unveiled his new cabinet last November, making history for the country in many ways. It was one of the most ethnically diverse cabinets to date, and it is the first to have equal numbers of men and women. Among the 15 women appointed, many were given important portfolios, including Jody Wilson-Raybould to Justice and Carolyn Bennett to Indigenous and Northern Affairs. Apart from gender equity, youth is the other issue that Prime Minister Trudeau cares about deeply. Trudeau's cabinet is younger overall than past Canadian governments. He also appointed himself Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and Youth. Canada has never had a national Ministry of Youth, and historically only junior ministers have been assigned responsibility for youth. Moreover, Trudeau is looking to form a youth council to help shape the future of Canadian policy.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau really is a politician of a totally new generation. He's coming into the office, as we mentioned earlier, had a lot to do with his beliefs into the political potential of the young people. And adding to that, also takes on gender equity, a centerpiece of his administration's policy, going as far as to openly and proudly call himself a feminist. Katie Telford, Chief of Staff to Canadian Prime Minister, explained to me in detail how youth development and gender equity are setting the latest trend in politics in her country, Canada. We do not know much about how a Prime Minister's office is being run. We only heard it or saw it from The West Wing, for example, the TV series, or The House of Cards. So exactly how does that work?
So not like the House of Cards. More on the West Wing spectrum between those two. Myself as Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, and our Prime Minister in particular, committed to having a cabinet government. So we have ministers who are elected, he then appoints them as ministers, and they have a lot of authority. So we as staff play a role of coordination, of prioritization, but really of being support to all of them, to the cabinet and to the Prime Minister.
Some were suggesting the current structure of the Prime Minister's office is a legacy, continued legacy of the last Prime Minister Trudeau back in 1968. More oversight of the ministers and more services to the overall bureaucracy structure. Do you agree?
So I was definitely not there under Trudeau Sr., but we interestingly stumbled across, actually one of the public servants shared with us a document that they found from I think it was probably from the early 70s. I think there are certainly similarities, though it's always been a bit shrouded how the staff part of the organization works. It's one of the things that I have been looking, and my team has been looking to change, because I believe that the way that we can engage more young people, bring more women into the Prime Minister's office, bring more diversity into the Prime Minister's office, the best way to do that is to be more open about who's there and what we do.
But no change would come without challenges. I'm sure
True.
When you started those ideas, try to implement those ideas, there will be different opposition voices.
That is very true. And
the long sigh seemed to tell the story already.
Having said that, we have only been in, as we remind ourselves regularly, we are only just actually within this last week celebrating, if you can call it that, 1 year since the beginning of what was one of the longest elections in Canadian history. And so we have not even been elected for a year yet. So we're just at the beginning of our mandate with a lot more to do. It is a challenge, though. I think we have developed such a great dynamic as a team from early times. You know, I was involved during the campaign. Obviously, I was the campaign director, and so I have watched all of these politicians grow in their roles from the first times many of them knocked on doors. We have a lot of rookie politicians and rookie cabinet ministers, and we have some with great experience as well. And so we all know each other well enough that I think we're able to find our way through the challenges so far.
Talking about the campaign, I was told you are extremely good at numbers. You want all your members in the campaign to come up with numbers every time they see you. How did that work?
So I definitely gained a reputation for numbers and for talking about numbers a lot.
The queen of numbers.
And I did that right from the very beginning because we were determined as a campaign team to be much more results-based and data-driven. Numbers don't lie, and they tell a story, and a story that is easier to explain to people when you can root them in those facts, in those numbers. And so we collected a lot of data because we had a lot of learning to do as a party too. We were in third place, and a distant third place, and we had been through a couple of very rough elections, and had a bit of a crisis as a party. And so we knew we really had to rediscover ourselves and our connection with Canadians, which meant we had a lot to learn. And so the best way we believed to learn was through collecting information that could best inform us.
Which number eventually get Mr. Trudeau into the office?
No one number, actually. No one number. Actually, what I do say my favorite number is. So I wouldn't say it was the one number that got us into office, but there's a reason it's my favorite because I think it was key to getting him into office. We tracked the number of volunteers that we engaged across the country. And by the time the campaign hit, we had over 80,000 volunteers, which in a country the size of Canada is a very big number. And so having that number of over 80,000 volunteers, we also tracked the number of door knocks and phone calls that were made to voters to talk to them.
Was it 5 million for the first week during the party leadership?
We did pretty well. So
it's amazing.
Those were the kinds of numbers that meant the most to me because they told me how much work was being done.
But how did those numbers come into being? That is the amazing thing. I mean, 5 million for the week.
A lot of hard work. A lot of hard work. What we did see was that it took us a very long time to achieve those numbers if you look back to the beginning of our training program. So we didn't hide these numbers. We put out news bulletins kind of to our team and talked about them with the media because it was part of convincing Canadians too about the work that we were going to do and how we were going to get into those communities and that these candidates were going to knock on doors and get to know every inch of their community.
It's amazing how you geared up the young people as volunteers because when you look at politics elsewhere, many young people become disillusioned about politics. They become indifferent to politics.
Not just young people anymore, unfortunately, but especially young people, it's true.
We have to say that, yes, indeed. What takes you eventually to convince them to be on board?
First of all, the Prime Minister was essential to the connection with young people. As you may know, the Prime Minister hung on to a ministerial portfolio, and he is not only the Prime Minister, he is the Minister of Youth. And so he continues to keep that connection with young people because it's that important to him. And he had a background in working with young people and in the nonprofit sector. He was a teacher and so had literally worked in the classroom with young people. And so he brought that to bear from the very beginning of our thinking on the campaign of how we were going to engage young people. And it was a bit of a risk in some people's minds to put the focus on young people that we did, because in Canada, young people don't vote in the same kind of numbers that seniors and older people do, unless you got more of them to vote. So the Prime Minister was key in terms of both putting it as a priority and in terms of the message and talking to young people. And then those numbers came in handy again, where we tracked everything. And so after his leadership campaign, we were able to look at the numbers and see young people didn't want to sign up to a political party, but they would give us their time if they didn't have to sign up first. And so they would come and volunteer on the leadership campaign. They'd sometimes even give us money, to my utter surprise, before they would sign up. Well, right now, the Prime Minister, with his Minister of Youth hat on, actually he just launched a process within the country or a competition for young people to sign up and apply to be part of a youth advisory council, a Prime Minister's Youth Advisory Council. So he is keeping the priority there big time, shall we say.
I'm sure there will be a lot of debates within that council.
I suspect so. I have a lot of people tweeting at me and telling me, that they have applied that I've not met before, but it's very exciting to see the level of engagement out there. And I've been talking to some of the youth from other countries that are at the summit here about checking out what it is that the Prime Minister's doing in Canada. And this is something I've heard him say many times to young people for many years, is they aren't leaders of tomorrow, they are leaders today.
Prime Minister Trudeau has made it to the centerpiece of the administration's policy, gender equity. But I think from your personal story, even, that means some challenge. During the election, you were questioned by many, particularly those longtime followers of the party, whether you are up to the job, whether you are capable enough, whether you are matured enough, and whether women is okay with that.
Yeah, there was some of that.
To say the least, I know, now you're retrospect.
Yeah, well, and there were challenges even dating further back, not just with critics, but in terms of just how to manage it all myself. When the Prime Minister, the then MP for Papineau, which he still is, the Member of Parliament for Papineau, when he approached me to get involved, he said he was thinking about the leadership, and if he were to do that, would I consider running his leadership campaign? And I remember looking at him and saying, you realize that I'm on maternity leave. But I have been, I now have, so I was on maternity leave then, and I now have a wonderful, just turned 5-year-old son. And so, but we all had that. And key really to our team from the very beginning, whether it was Jerry Butts, the Principal Secretary I mentioned, whether it's the Prime Minister or myself, and the broader team, a lot of us have young kids. We have cabinet ministers. There's been a lot of news stories about how different cabinet ministers are managing work-life balance. One of them turns off her BlackBerry for a couple of hours every evening, and that's the experiment she's trying to make it all work with her young kids at home. In terms of the critics who are sort of the ones who weren't sure, either because of age or gender or whatever the difference, I was privileged to have a leader who pretty much told us to ignore that noise.
You were at the time have to leave Toronto. That's where your home was.
I just moved to Ottawa this past January.
During the campaign also.
Oh yeah, no, I was away from
to
my
leave
family.
your little child back at home. And also your husband, even now when you come into the Prime Minister's office, he has to quit his job as a political commentator. Because of
he didn't have to, but he chose to.
He chose to.
And
so
yeah.
So it seems that there has to be a lot of changes within the family.
Yeah.
How are you coping with that, and how have they been coping with that?
So I obviously am very fortunate to have the family that I have, who have been so incredibly supportive from the very beginning. We are more, I think, flexible perhaps. I think it's the changing times in a way that, I bring my son to, I brought him along to many a campaign event in the leadership campaign in Toronto. He found rallies very noisy. And he didn't fully understand. Though one of the things, actually a tweet that people raise with me to this day, that my husband actually posted to social media during the campaign and then I reposted, was how my son asked my husband at one point during the campaign if daddies were allowed to vote. Oh. And
where does that question come from?
My husband said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, because mummies run elections. And so he was a bit younger even at the time. So he is definitely a more civic-minded, I think, 3,
another
4,
gender
5-year-old
stereotypes,
than most,
I guess.
But, yes, he's getting a different one, which is why it got so much attention, is because, hopefully we're opening doors and minds to people realizing that, shoe may be on other foot, but these are challenges that young and working parents have all the time.
But what do you make from a women leaders perspective of the recent rise of women leaders all over the world? You've seen prime ministers, presidents of what we call, quote unquote, important countries, decision-making countries in the international system. and you also see rising of the young women leaderships around the world as well.
One of the ways that I think it will be, though, is if women keep, to your point, leaning in. But I actually, the campaign that I really like that Lean In is doing that recently launched is Lean In Together. And I think that, and that's to both men and women, that they need to be supporting, they need to be supporting women rising and not seeing it as either a competition with each other or as a threat to men. And I think that support is key, and I hope that our cabinet, I hope that me and my role and my collaboration with my colleagues and with the Prime Minister, that this can open some minds and doors. The research out there is proving true that having that many women around the table really does make a difference. It's been less than a year, and so Canadians haven't yet all heard their stories. I mean, it takes a while for the stories to get through, because there are some pretty phenomenal stories and backgrounds, and these ministers are doing phenomenal work and working so hard that I don't see how Canadians won't see the change. It just may take some time.
And of course, the Prime Minister can be very charismatic. We all saw that photo, very popular on social media. He was doing push-up on the tables in the office. Of course, that was before he became Prime Minister. But still, it was really refreshing to many around the world. How would you describe that person, Prime Minister Trudeau?
He works really, really hard. He is a very disciplined individual in terms of his focus on work and his focus on connecting with Canadians. So whether it's pushing us to think of different ways of doing town halls, and he much prefers doing a town hall where he gets to have questions and answers with people in the audience than to only do a speech and then have to leave. He loves to plunge into a crowd, and which is a bit different as Prime Minister, but he still does it. And it's that connection with Canadians, while at the same time that discipline of ensuring that the whole team understands the priorities.